Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Spencer Ackerman is back on the show discussing his comic book debut, Waller vs. Wildstorm. As a fan of comics, it was fun to see how Spencer brings his journalism expertise to the comics medium. Spencer shares his thoughts on the comics creative process and collaboration. It was also fascinating to hear his take on writing his first comic book as a musician. We discuss the pacing of the pages in reference to music, and he breaks down the rhythm of the book like drum rudiments. So much fun. I am thrilled to have repeat guests I can now call friends. Spencer is so much fun to talk to, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. In case you don't already know, Spencer Ackerman, a columnist for The Nation magazine and a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, has been a national security correspondent for nearly the entire War on Terror. He is the publisher of the Forever Wars newsletter on Ghost, where he tracks the ongoing course of the War on Terror. He is the author of Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump, which won a 2022 American Book Award. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Spencer! Yay!
Hey, Mimi, it's so great to see you.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe it's actually been quite a while since we've had a real conversation. I have, borderline harassed you and your wife here and there for advice and just to kind of be a shoulder to lean on, but it is nice to finally catch up.
Not harassed, hung out, exchanged words and texts, and went through the things that you go through when you're long distance friends with someone.
I know. No, yes, it's been fantastic. I'm so grateful to know you both and to be able to have you both at my text disposal.
Same. I comment on Oscar's Instagram, all that.
Oh, love. Yes. And we both are kind of getting back from traveling, because we're international world travelers and all.
Where were you guys?
We were in Peru. And it was very grueling. I think off air, you and I were kind of laughing about like, oh my goodness, it's just kind of harder and harder to travel as time, marches on for us. Our bodies and mind don't necessarily align. Like I was like, oh yeah, it'll be fine. It's trains, planes, and automobiles to Machu Picchu. We'll just have 2 days here, 1 day here, 1 day here. And it was exhaustive. Just the whole travel of it. It is such a remote location, obviously beautiful, obviously grateful, but it took a bit of recovery, and you literally just got back.
I did. Yeah. We went for most of August to Ireland. We did a home swap with some people over there who had wanted to visit New York. And that was incredible. I saw the Cliffs of Moher at sea level. Had a great time in various Dublin bars, even though I don't really drink anymore. But I figured, when in Ireland, how can you not?
You have to partake of the local culture. Yes.
We founded, this is really credit to my wife. We found an archaeology camp for our oldest, which was a great time. She got to really immerse herself in some Irish history.
Okay.
Every day I would pick her up, and every day that I would pick her up, she'd be super enthusiastic about it. Tell me about like the proper form for firing a bow and arrow.
Oh,
talk
okay.
about, handling, real like Iron Age swords. She just had an absolute blast. I don't recommend transatlantic travel with a toddler. So that was kind of rough. Our youngest did excellently, considering that we were, pulling her entirely out of circumstances. But we made a lot of memories on that I'm just going to cherish for a long time.
Amazing. Well, I love that you were there for such a length of time, because that really is immersive.
Yeah, I've never done anything like this outside of, work, which has
Right.
always
Which
been
is totally different.
and has, uniformly come in places vastly less pleasant and calm than summer in Ireland. So,
you don't say.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, I was really excited to hear that you were traveling and I always try to keep up with the newsletter and the blog and seeing what you're writing. And oh my God, it's not a blog. I'm so sorry. I retract that full statement.
It's a blog. It's a blog.
No,
it's a 2020s era blog.
Spencer is not a blogger. Oh my gosh. Like award-winning journalist and all that. Like, oh my goodness. Speaking of which, diving in, and I know you and we could just catch up all day and listeners will go, are we just going to, hear about you guys' like summer travels? And I think that would be fine too. But longtime comics fan, you and I, it's actually for our listeners that don't know, what brought us together is I was listening to a podcast about your amazing book, which I did read. And then you threw out Lazarus as a recommendation. And I was like, well, now he is my friend and I must reach out and talk to him about such things. In addition to, of course, your phenomenal book. That was it's just continuously so relevant, and Reign of Terror. And so, yeah, I reached out to you and we've podcasted since and become friends. And it's been kind of amazing, but comics brings people together.
Indeed. You hosted one of my favorite podcast appearances I've ever been lucky enough to do, our book club about My Name is Red. I love that we did that. That was so much fun. That's kind of an insane episode. I really love it. I cherish that memory as well.
Yes. I mean, you've really gotten me to step outside of my comfort zone in terms of reading, because one is, your book as a whole, it's not an upper, and no, I'm kind of like I need to have like rom-coms in my life these days. It just candy is what I kind of call it that I consume for reading but I do feel more enriched when I take on like kind of these deeper things. And so of course, I read your book and then we read My Name is Red, which is also not really candy, but wow, just literary, just such a contrast and really challenged me. So thank you for that.
Well, sure. Not that I should be in the same sentence as Orhan Pamuk. And My Name is Red is a vastly more richly fulfilling emotional experience than Reign of Terror. I'm very grateful for that, though.
Yes. And so in addition now to your journalistic prowess and accolades as an author, you're now a writer of comics. I mean, is it still surreal, or is it just exciting every moment?
No, absolutely. Surreal and exciting every moment. I couldn't have asked for a better experience. I don't really know that I get to call myself a writer of comics. I've written a comic book miniseries. I feel weird about it. I see your face and I appreciate that. I appreciate where that's coming from. But, I don't know that, at the point in which we're recording this, I have, released a grand total of 2 comic book issues. So, I don't know. It's training day for me still. But it's literally a lifelong dream come true. And every time, when I'm doing a lettering pass, which is the point at which all of the art is compiled and you go back and you check the way the pages read for flow and rhythm and clarity. The fact that I get to do that, to be kind of behind the scenes in a process that involves something that me and a friend wrote, is just so special. And, waiting, to see pages as they come in from Jesus Marino, our incredible artist on Waller versus Wildstorm. It's a thrill. It's when I get those pages, it's the highlight of my day. the experience just, it's surreal. My first time out, I was invited to be on a panel at New York Comic Con, my hometown Comic Con, hosted by Jim Lee, in which I got interviewed by Jim Lee. That, you can't, that is the kind of thing that I just could never, you can't take that for granted. That's really just the sort of thing that I feel when I was up there. Never was my imposter syndrome stronger. I have no business being on a panel with Jim Lee. Also on that panel were like John Ridley, Joe Quesada, Mark Silvestri. Like, that's an insane amount of like real proven, not just comics talent, but comics legends and, future legends in the case of Nicholas. And I just, I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life. That was a bucket list thing.
Amazing. Well, congrats on it. Congrats on Waller versus Wildstorm. I actually remember when we were in the city, in New York, hanging out, you had mentioned, okay, this isn't released yet, but I'm going to be working on a comic. And now here we are talking about it like in the flesh. We've got the pages and it's just so exciting. And I feel like I want to ask a little bit about process, just because you have been writing and investigating, doing just research, and it's very different than the comic process, because I understand from talking to Greg, of course, all the time, that it's so collaborative and it's a lot different. Is the collaboration different from the area, the expertise in which you come from, or was it like kind of a natural transition? Because you kind of mentioned already just waiting for those pages to come in and how exciting that is. So how did the process differ or translate over for you?
There were more similarities than I think might be commonly presumed. I will say that I've, getting copy in from collaborators journalistically is not often as like immediately like emotionally exciting as it is getting comics pages in, no disrespect to my many collaborators over the years. But good journalism is a team sport.
Okay.
There is a way in which bylines lie, in the sense that, when you read a piece of journalism, there are, up top after the headline and then the subheadline that explains what you're reading, someone's name is on there. Sometimes it's multiple people's names representing the contributions of the people who reported and wrote this story. Sometimes it's one person's name, a primary writer / reporter. Mm-hmm. But in all cases, that doesn't adequately credit the people who worked on the journalism that you read. Exactly. We have a not particularly helpful and I think not particularly honest way of erasing from view in journalism the people who edit the stories in particular. Very often, especially when you're a staff reporter at a news outlet, you didn't choose the story that you did that day, that you filed and that has your name on it. The editor did. Very often, the copy that comes out, I would say in, vastly, 95, if not higher percent of cases in journalism, the copy that you filed is not the copy that makes it, to print. Substantially it is. Yeah. But editors, not just, the person who does the final sign off on that piece, but editors throughout the process, copy editors, if you're at magazines, fact checkers, played a significant role in shaping that story, both in content and in form. Oftentimes, the bylines don't give adequate weight, even when it is multiple bylines on a piece, to the contributions of the people there. Okay. Very often, at news organizations, there is something of a star system, and that can, erase or obscure hard work, news gathering work that's done by people who might not be, top of the hierarchy.
Right.
And then you'll often see, when you read a good piece of journalism, very often you'll find at the bottom of the story in italics something that we call a contrib line, which is saying that there were additional contributions by, X, Y, and Z people throughout the newsroom. Very often those people did quite a lot of reporting, but just didn't get the byline there. The point that I'm kind of driving at is that when it gets to the process of the assembly line that I've often heard, comics creators use to describe making a comic book, journalism is very often its own assembly line. And, more willing to credit the people who did it. I'm not saying more willing to, materially compensate those who did it. But comics credit three levels of editors, after each comic, right? There's an associate editor, there's, the editor, there's a group editor, there's the editor in chief, so maybe even more than that. Journalism, we don't really do that. At the same time, also, a similarity is the kind of the deadline poetry of it all, which is to say, you've got to do this by 4:00 or it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
And, you are, 4:00 is, where we would have our kind of, in newsrooms, particularly at newspapers and, the equivalent, online outlets. The point, if you're doing daily journalism, the point in the day in which you, get everyone together for, planning the evening edition and you figure out, well, what actually came in of what we planned for that morning, and how long and, at what point, do those stories have to kind of mesh into what in comics you would, consider the publishing line. So those experiences at least prepared me for this, but obviously it's just much, much different in terms of, I have to, create a story out of my mind, not out of my research. And, that's just tremendous. And the process throughout of refining a story as it goes through, the process is also simultaneously similar and different. When you write a piece of journalism, particularly when it's short, turnaround, deadline stuff. And by that, I mean, stuff where you've got, hours or, in breaking news situations, up to the moment, compilations of just get what you've reported and checked, write it up real quick, get it through the process so that it can be very swiftly edited and then published. Very often throughout the process, you're like, well, I have a little bit more time once we get to the next stage in the process for, making sure that all of this is, buttoned down and so forth. And it's never, the kind of time you want, but also comic books very much, similar to that. An important difference is that the real writing of comics, I found, is not in the scripting stage, where you write out, in the case of this, because it was a DC comic. I understand some Marvel comics are also, if not most Marvel comics are done like this now, but I've never done that. So I don't want to speak to an experience that I haven't, shared or sufficiently reported, but it's a full script, giving at the front end to the editor and then the artists, the dialogue that's in there, broken down panel by panel, page by page, and so on. But the real writing, I found, happens when the art comes back on that lettering pass. And now you see for the first time how the artist put this together and paste it. And your job is to match that and make sure that what you had in the scripting stage adequately explains what the artist has rendered when it needs explanation, and works harmoniously with that art. And you really have to, or I'll speak for, just speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I found that, given that I was lucky enough to work with, a pro who's done it all, like Jesus, that I could either be precious about those moments when what he saw from the script diverged from what I saw from it, or I could enhance the experience that this, expert, provided back by then switching up what I had to match what he put in there. And there, it's really an interesting philosophical question about how much writing Jesus ends up doing by default at those moments by pacing, in addition to what I did, in addition to what Evan did, and also in addition to what our editors, Chris Conroy and Marquise Draper, did when they do their thing. Very often, and this is particularly the case, I want to give, Chris his credit, for issue 3, which will probably be out right around the time we're going to release this episode. There were often moments in, my pacing of issue 3 where I didn't have dialogue because I was like letting those visual moments come through. And then when he gets it back, he's like, it seems like it needs something else here. And he had suggestions for what that dialogue ought to be, and they were good. So we incorporated them. And that is different from journalism, but not different enough from the way the best journalism is constructed, where you've got people throughout the process who, are working on the same, end goal, and making sure that when they see bits in it that just like don't really feel right, whether it's factually, whether it's narratively, they come back and there's like, well, what if we did it like this? Have you thought about, in the case, this doesn't apply to comics, but in journalism, it's like, sometimes you just need to call more people. There's a saying in journalism that for a long time I resented because of how true it is and how uncomfortable a truth it is, that every writing problem in journalism is a reporting problem. That you're having trouble writing because you haven't sufficiently reported this enough so that you know how to get, across the narrative bridges that you need to tell this story. And then you have to, cry about it for a little bit to yourself and, kick the side of your desk and then go back and do more work because that's what the job is. And it's not totally like that in comics, but you really see how right up to the moment when that thing gets to the printer, you are still fiddling with it and realizing like, maybe something doesn't hit as hard now that we can, now that we see it in print, that we can kind of go back and revise a little at the beginning of this, like make this, moment land harder. Now maybe we don't need this bit of dialogue anymore, even though I might think of it as like a line I really loved that was precious to me. But the art has made it something better and possibly redundant. And, I could talk about the process, all day long. I
was just so curious because you're coming from such a specific background, right? And we talk a lot about, because of course I've had so many amazing creators on and they all have such a different process, even those that have been doing this for so long, right? And creatively, whether it's collaboratively, but there's kind of the general formula, right, of a comic book creation. And I was just curious how like that translated for you, like if it was just an easy transition or if it was difficult. It seems like you've transitioned quite well, especially like you said, because maybe versus like being a novelist where you really just work alone, solo all the time, you've kind of already had a collaborative background. But this comic in particular, the themes, a lot of capitalism and a lot of forever wars coming out onto the page. It's just this very what felt like a natural progression of material because you are from such an expert in that subject matter. It's like, how much research did you really have to do versus just like scroll your forever wars and go, oh, let me pull these few things out because I've already done that. Because I think a lot of times writers of comics are not experts in the subject matter that they are kind of maybe, putting onto the page, and it takes them books and books of research, whereas I feel like you're in a bit of an advantage in that way, where it's like it was just such a natural marriage of content. And Oscar wanted to give you a shout out and let you know he's just so proud to know you, and it was like so clear because we get your newsletter in our box, and it's just like it's just so cool to see all of the work that you're constantly doing to be able to come out in such a creative and impactful way for a different audience, right? Because obviously not comics readers aren't necessarily naturally going to be just reading articles of really cerebral dense content like yours, which is so intense and sometimes depressing, I'll be honest, but essential, but so essential. And so when it's in comic forms and we get things like America is just the clothes capital wears, and since when does America build a weapon it doesn't export? And we get like these little, nudges that like, hey, let's think about this. It's just it's so great. And so thank you for that. But how was that for you? Like, did you struggle with having to like pull back too much of what or was it just like, this feels kind of right to be able to put in so much narrative that you've done like so much time researching and reporting on?
It was possibly the most cathartic writing experience I've ever had. I don't typically write fiction. Like I don't have, there are a lot of reporters who have like a novel in their drawers. Okay. I'm not one of them. One of the best journalists alive, one of the best writers alive, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I guess now 3 years ago, he came out with an incredible novel called The Water Dancer. Ta-Nehisi had been working on that book for, I think, over a decade, something like that, possibly longer. That's not me. I am not a natural fiction writer. I found that embracing the kind of core mission of the assignment for this, write a year one for the premier spy chief of the DC Comics universe, meshing together the very similar themes of corporate and imperial and technological paranoia from the DC Comics Wildstorm universe. That got me a lot of the way to my comfort level and beyond, where I could take ways of processing stuff that I've reported and finding resonant fictional and allegorical ways of addressing the same material that I do in my journalism, which is pretty much exclusively about crimes of the state, crimes of a capitalist economy, things that we don't often think of or are led to think of as crimes, that blend into the kind of standard operating procedures of these institutions and superstructures that I want to call attention to from a kind of, criminal framework. And accordingly, you can do a lot of journalism, particularly about the intelligence and security worlds, as a way of highlighting differences of perception and argument and clashes between those perceptions by the people who are the central driving figures in those stories, those true stories. You rarely get to do a real like Rashomon narrative in nonfiction for good and responsible reasons.
Right.
But now I could do that in fiction while using a lot of the kind of similar themes that I explore in nonfiction. And that was exhilarating. And that was also, there were moments where they also, because I want to write more comics than this, I felt that I was in really like show and prove time, that Waller versus Wildstorm is a demo tape that I want, others in comics to be able to see me like, oh, well, maybe he's capable of doing this and working in these kinds of modes. I I also, enjoy spy fiction, and getting to, write some of that and sort of getting to do it in superheroics. I've read comic books since I learned to read. I learned to read in large part because my mother read me Bill Matlow's Incredible Hulk comics. My cousins, when we would go see them, had like big long boxes of Chris Claremont, Dave Cockrum, and then John Byrne and Paul Smith Uncanny X-Men. So I've read that, the vast majority of my life. And so getting to work on the stuff that I normally work on through comics was exhilarating.
Yeah. And so you've opened the question to, or is it too scary to announce out loud, like kind of what your next, dream comic character you'd love to work on? Or is there one that you've always wished you'd worked on? Because obviously this is already a big hit and a big win, but being a longtime X-Men fan and Incredible Hulk fan, and is there a character that you've had your eye on?
Oh, I mean, I'll be shameless about this. Absolutely. That I wouldn't have gotten this comic if I didn't put out into the world that I was interested in writing Amanda Waller. So, that's checked off. I would absolutely love to write, anything X-Men related. I would love to write anything Titans related. One of the things I made sure to do when I got to throw my wish list of which characters I wanted to play with, I threw in Deathstroke the Terminator and his ex-wife Adewine Kane into Waller versus Wildstorm. I adore those characters. I am often a kind of villain anti-hero person, and it's something that the subject matter that I tend to gravitate towards. I think is a sort of natural, prism for exploring. I would love to write more Deathstroke. One of my favorite characters of all time, for which I have an extensive story Bible for what I would do with this character, broken down by arcs, is Namor the Submariner.
Okay.
That would be really a dream come true. I love Doctor Doom. Would really, I have some ideas for that as well. I could go on and on.
I know,
but I really, if any editors are listening,
I know. Well, let's just put it out there, and I think also you're probably, since you're gracing these panels with such elite comic heroes and people in the industry, I'm sure that you've got more in your future coming your way, and you may get to pick and choose even. So, but that's really cool. I love it. I feel like it just must have been so kind of daunting, right? Because you have already a reputation as an author, and then it's like, okay, now I'm taking on this totally different medium, and I think people don't realize how difficult that jump can be. But I wanted to ask you before I forget, because you are a musician and you love music. You and I have talked music as well, not as extensively as I'd like, but I was curious because I love when the joy of reading is half of it exists in your head, right? Like you get to use your imagination still. And even with comics, even though you're seeing the colors on the page and the art, I'm hearing things, right? And so I was curious if you have thought of a soundtrack for your issues, or at least
I'll go you one better. This was a learning process.
Okay.
In which a bad idea of mine that was very much a rookie mistake had to be filtered out early on.
Okay.
But the soundtrack to Waller versus Wildstorm for me is the punk band from Chicago, Off With Their Heads cover of the Spencer Davis group, Give Me Some Lovin'.
Okay.
A song that you will most likely hear at grocery stores and Toyota-thons. Not Off With Their Heads version, but that song in particular, the
Yeah.
give me some love and give me some love. Anyway,
Love it.
in the first issue, there is a 3-page silent sequence of ultra violence by the Wildstorm version of SEAL Team 6 that's known as Team 7, visited on a town in El Salvador. We won't be more specific than that for reasons, but those familiar with the dirty war in El Salvador that the United States materially supported featured unspeakable human rights abuses that resonate to this day. And I wanted to call attention to that by very deliberately setting this scene here. I had originally the idea for this is that as this scene was unfolding, this team that's Grifter, Deathblow, Cannon from Stormwatch, Arclight from Will Sportacio's Wetworks, Bulleteer and Deathstroke, and John Lynch were going to be singing the Spencer Davis Group's Gimme Some Lovin'. And there are ways in which, I wrote this sequence with, particularly when they get on the ground and are shooting through a church and, kidnapping an 8-year-old and, putting this town to the sword.
Yes.
Each panel matched a different lyric from the song that each of them were going to be singing. Now, little did I know that DC Comics was not going to pay the licensing for this, but that more importantly, this was an insane thing to do because comics can't be the one thing comics cannot be is a medium that expresses sound.
Right.
You can get close with sound effects and certain aspects of pacing, but you can't really do it. And this was a bad idea that didn't work. And my editor, Chris, had to gingerly say, well, we can't do that. But then that led to what I think is just a much better idea, which is to kind of honor the solemnity of this atrocity by being silent. There's not sound effects for this. There are 2 words in this entire sequence, and those words are Jakarta Viene, which is a reference to an excellent book of journalism by Vincent Bevins called The Jakarta Method that I strongly recommend your readers check out. That's a story of U.S. supported and inter-influenced anti-communist reactionary violence that stretches from Brazil and beyond. And I wanted to reference that importantly. From a musical perspective, beyond that bad idea that didn't work. So I'm a drummer.
Yes. And
the role, as I see it, the role of the drummer is to pace, to build, to cue, to release. And then once you've done all of those things adequately, you can, to finesse, and then you can kind of, demonstrate your style. Writing comics, I've listened to, I'm a comics lifer, so I've listened to, for years and years before I did this, millions of comics, podcasts and read, millions of comics interviews about process. But not until I really started writing did I fully appreciate the beauty and also the unforgiving rhythm of the page turn, which is that final panel, usually in the lower corner, and especially, for, even in this series, it's an even number. It's an odd number for doing the page turn. That has to work like that has a rhythm. Mm-hmm. And I found, especially as a novice, that the best thing I could do would be, as I was breaking down the scenes that I wanted to have in this, I would, once I had checked the box of, do we need this scene to advance the story?
Yeah.
Then the question was, for what, for each scene and the, unforgiving budget of how many pages we have, how many page turns does this moment carry? Should this convey? So like when we're not turning a page, but we're ending a page, I thought that panel has to be a cymbal crash moving into the next page. And every time you're going to turn the page, that panel before the actual physical page turn, that has to be a fill. So I've got to have something there that's like, meaning that like there's something interesting and arresting about that moment that has to earn my way of getting you, the reader, to want to turn that page, to want to move from one page to another, and especially to turn the page and advance the story. So like, I'm setting up a rhythm at the top of the page, and I'm either introducing an added accent by the end of that page as we move into that next page. As we set up, I might be introducing a polyrhythm going slightly ajar, and in an interesting way, I hope, against that rhythm that I've started to establish, and which allows my collaborators to do their more arresting thing, whether it's guitars, horns, keys, etc. Because that's the thing that you as a reader / a listener are going to focus on, because it's right there in front of you. And then when we've got the turn, I've set up something sufficiently dramatic, or at least that's my aim, arresting in its attention, compelling you, and then guiding my collaborators into getting something that's like a big crescendo and then, out to build up in cue for the next one. And I asked myself, how many page turns, how many cymbal crashes, how many fills, does this moment in the story need to be?
Yeah. I love this. Oh my goodness. My mind is like kind of reeling right now. It's like the musical pacing of comics through Spencer's, point of view. And I love that, because there's something so, vivid in how you've just described that, because of course if you just have constant cymbal crashing, it's just loud and it's obnoxious and it's just too much, right? But if you've got things that are building, I know that we've talked a little bit about hip hop, and hip hop's 50, yay, we just did an episode on that. And so just like the things that are really exciting in music is often the build, and just that anticipation of where is it going, and being able to correlate that into making a comic. This has been very eye-opening. Thank you for that. I don't know that I would have seen it that way. But what I love is, first of all, your humility, like in the approach of this, and how much you've been open to learning through the process, but like that you take your expertise, whether it's journalism or music, and then you're able to apply that to something new, right? Because even though writing is technically writing, it's totally new. And for me as a martial artist, I absolutely love that, because for us, when we teach Kung Fu, and as a teacher, we don't teach Kung Fu as like, this is a kick, this is a punch, this is a movement. We teach Kung Fu as the philosophy of this is hard work. And this principle is what I'd like you to take forward into what you do at home, what you do at work, what you do in your life. And the principles that we teach at Kung Fu are beyond just that word as well. And we want all of those applications to be kind of done outside of the training hall and what you're doing physically. And so it's so cool that you've taken your skill set and your knowledge and what you know, and you're able to apply that to other things. And so it's just, I think that's fantastic. Very masterful. Thank you for sharing that. On a technical note, because I have the writer here and the one who knows all of the things, I normally a really good book, a really good comic. Oscar likes to credit anytime I say, "Ooh, that's a great vocabulary word," or "way to go with this," he's like, "Oh, it's because I read comics. That's how I learned first of all, how he learned a lot of English as someone who grew up speaking Spanish in the home, obviously going to school, but reading the comics and everything, I think also just really enhanced that. And so I find opportunities of learning here, like you just kind of shared about the Jakarta method, things like that. I'm like, okay, there's so much I have to learn, but I'm reading this one and I didn't get a chance to look up. And I'd love for you to kind of just share a little about some of the things that I read that I didn't necessarily know about or understand. And if there's more of those things you want to share, but what is the difference between a rendition and a kidnapping as described in the comic? Because I was like, I think I'm missing something here. I'm just not in the know.
So this is one of those circumstances where I'm taking like pretty directly from the stuff that I report on. Lois Lane answers, it's a rendition when we do it, and it's a kidnapping when someone Washington doesn't like does it. And her interlocutor / source in that scene, Battalion from the Wildstorm superhero team Stormwatch, is really offended by that because it exhibits a moral relativism that many in intelligence circles in the United States find absolutely anathema and really just very offensive. And he throws back at her, it's good to know when a journalist can't tell the good guys from the bad guys. And this may or may not be taken from conversations that I have had with people. It's not 100% like just this was more me putting in the subtext of many of those conversations. I never had that line in those words spat back at me. I have had that sentiment spat back at me many times. And I, brought it out precisely to, spur that question, that really what is the difference? From a definitional perspective, a rendition is the process of intelligence operatives seizing someone off the street, usually in a foreign, I would say probably exclusively in a foreign location, and then taking them to another location. What is called a sort of adjectiveless rendition is one in which someone is taken to another country and facing trial. It's distinct from an extradition because it's not a process where someone who is in custody, following something that they've already been charged with, is taken and given to another partner jurisdiction. What's called an extraordinary rendition, which is something we became familiar with during the War on Terror, is when such a thing occurs so that the abducted person is given to a partner intelligence agency, not ultimately to stand trial, but to be tortured by a different intelligence agency. That happened extensively during the War on Terror, and we'll never know how extensively, because the records of those things happening were not made available by the CIA to the Senate Intelligence Committee during the one and only time the Senate Intelligence Committee got to investigate the CIA's post 9/11 torture program, which had as a major component and the kernel of that program, its existing renditions operations.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Now, I don't want to say, I want to be really clear about something that also, like, I feel deeply in my journalism and in my comics, but you can be kind of more freewheeling about this in comics. I don't want you to come to this kind of just agreeing with me or just saying that, like, what's on the page is the truth or what I've just told you is the truth.
Right,
journalism ought to be read skeptically. My journalism is no different than that. Mm-hmm. It is good in, the moment of the practice for someone like Lois to challenge an account like Jackson's. But also, I didn't want to write a comic, and I thought it would be hacky of me to write a comic in which, the people who are quote unquote right in the story are all people who, think as I do.
Mm.
I think if we've done our job right, I think we've constructed a story in which, especially as you get to the second issue,
yes,
that there are moments at all times when all characters across the spectrum of people's relationships to official power are making good points and are making bad points. Lois is right at times, Lois is wrong at times. Jackson is telling the truth at times, and then we see in issue 2, Jackson might not have told Lois, we see this in issue 1, but we really see this in issue 2, Jackson might not have told Lois the full truth. Lois might not be apprehending the full truth. We see Amanda making points that are very different from Jackson's. Sometimes she makes good points, sometimes she makes bad points, and like on and on. And
yes,
you as a reader should be asking yourself, if you want to engage with the book on this level, when do they say something that I agree with? And at what point in the book is that challenged? And I wanted to write something that destabilizes everyone's beliefs. I think it has a core critique that moves through the book. And it's a critique that I stand by, but it's not good comics, just like it's not good journalism if it's just what one person believes and I'm talking at you. I didn't want to do that. I hope I haven't done that. I did a signing at JHU Comics in Manhattan, and I was very happy to see that Rob George, who's a conservative journalist and a comics enthusiast, who I've been friendly with, for many, many years. And we've often, despite the fact that we disagree about a lot of stuff, we bond over the fact that we, have a similar kind of enthusiasm for comics. He came out to this signing, and I was really grateful that he wanted to pick up this book at all. And I told him, like, there's going to be lots of things in this comic that I'm sure you will disagree with, but I hope you will come away from it, thinking that, structurally, it holds up as a story. And he was gracious enough to say, like, there might not be as many things I disagree with as you think and presume that I would disagree with. And I really like that. And I want that to be, something that comes out of, people's experiences if they choose to engage with Waller versus Wildstorm. I recognize that, this is a very political comic. And so accordingly, it won't be for everyone. And that's fine. And, there are people who, I have, while I have not put myself, through the deliberate self-harm of name searching, I've read my reviews. I've been very grateful that most of them are good reviews, but I've also gotten good feedback from people for whom, like, the comic didn't work.
Yeah. Well, this is the nature of reading, though, right? Like, this is why we have such a, diverse scope of genre that we get to choose from. But no, actually, kind of just before the podcast, Oscar and I were kind of talking, because I was like, oh, I got Spencer now. And it was kind of exactly what you kind of just mentioned, was in 1 minute you're like, is he the good guy or the bad guy? Do I agree with this or I disagree with this? And you're like, because you essentially, you look at Amanda as, well, she's obviously, quote unquote, the hero or the protagonist, and you're kind of just like, wait, but what's happening here? Like, there are moments where you're like not as likable in this, part of your monologue or whatever, like, that you do kind of go back and forth. And because of course this first issue and the second issue, kind of, you get more into it, but it's a lot of setting up, like getting to know these people. And as somebody who's not as familiar with the Checkmate universe and all of the characters in the background and everything like that, I was like, okay, you're just really kind of coming to it with a clean slate. Then you really have to get to know people. And you do find yourself agreeing and disagreeing with the same person, which is fascinating. And I already know, like, oh, I have a bias because I like Lois Lane from my previous, notion of who she is. But then you have to sit there and go, wait, why is she asking what she's asking, et cetera. So I love comics that do make you think, but also that I think this is a great comic for people that do want to maybe digest a little bit of politics in a medium such as this. So I think that's definitely found its audience. I definitely think new audience will find its way there. And so congrats on the book, and so excited. And I believe, is it September 12th? We're getting issue 3.
So
we're hoping.
I think that Tuesday, I think it's let me just check my calendar. This is boring for an audience, but I think right now it is. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's solicited for the 12th.
Okay.
Maybe that may or may not. I have not confirmed exactly when this thing comes back. I know. I will say that we kind of blew past a printer deadline during the process of putting together issue 3. I am grateful for that, though, because that allowed us to catch a moment. This is very journalism-like. At the absolute last minute, we caught something that was like, ooh, that might step on a big moment that we want in issue 3. And it was an extremely subtle thing. But, thank you again, by the grace of Chris Conroy Goai, that we got that changed. And so if the ship date slips a little because of that, please, I thank you for your forbearance, but also please know that happened because we were racing at the last minute to get this exactly right. And it won't be too long after September 12th, I hope.
All right. Well, either way, it will give readers a chance to catch up on 1 and 2 if they have not as yet. So please, go out, get your copies, and just super excited to read what's next and for your future comics character writing as well. I'll put it out there into the universe, and you never know who I'm going to end up talking to as well.
Definitely your podcast, yes.
I find myself very fortunate in who I get to speak to. And man, there's so many things I did want to pick your brain about as well, but we're at the hour, so I don't want to capitalize too much of your time, but it's always a pleasure, and hopefully you'll come back and chat with me soon.
Same, anytime. One piece of salesmanship.
Please.
So issue 1 and 2 are pretty text heavy. They're pretty dialogue heavy. We have our action beats in each of them. And like I mentioned, kind of from a kind of drumming perspective, I think if you read 1 and 2 together, you'll see that 1 is more dialogue heavy than 2, that we get kind of building to bigger action moments as we go through 2. Issue 3 is the action issue. So okay. we are like I mentioned, we're building crescendos. I viewed issue 3 because this is a 4-issue miniseries. Issue 3 had to work like issue 9 of issue 3 had to work like episode 9 of a 10-issue HBO prestige series where we've set a lot of stuff up, and issue 9 is where we set things on fire.
Yes.
And everything builds to a head, everything boils over, and it really crashes. So if you read 1 and 2 and you thought oh my God, this is just so many words, this is just so much talking, this is just 2 people, how much more are they going to make me read 2 people in a room together? This is the issue for you. Okay.
Well, I'm no spoilers, but at the end of 2, we kind of get a reveal of, all right, action might be coming on soon. So, right. So that you do set up for it, but okay. Good to know. Action is imminent. Well, I'm very excited for it. And, hopefully we'll get to hang out in person soon at a Comic-Con or something. Hey, come out to Rose City.
I'm so excited that you are paneling at Rose City.
Everyone's coming.
I know. What the dates of Rose City? I don't. Can I just be honest with you about this? Do I get to do that? I don't know. Again, because I've just done 2 comics. I have not super been a convention person. The kind of stuff I've done professionally has not provided me often like enough.
You can go out as press. You can be like, hey, I'd like to apply for a press badge at Rose City. No, of course you get to do that. I don't know that there's rules. I mean, what am I doing at all these panels if you're not supposed to be there as an actual
but you are but you host a successful comics community podcast, or a successful podcast that very often involves the comics community. I'm serious. Like, I don't, if it sounds weird, it sounds weird, but this is something, this is a medium that I've, had just like a ton of love, enthusiasm, and respect for. Yeah. And I do feel a little bit coming to it from journalism and, doing this because of what I've done in journalism, that I'm kind of cutting the line a little bit. You know what I mean? So I'm just this is just like stuff that goes through my head about coming out to cons. I wish I could go to Rose City. I've always heard Rose City is I've heard Rose City and Emerald City and C2E2 are like really fantastic.
I've only been once, and it was a great con for me because, that's where I really got to know everybody in the Portland area. I mean, there's just so many great creators in that area. So they just tend to kind of be there. And so it was a great time when I went. Also, Greg invited me to his house that time. So I was like, yes, I'm coming. I'm going to do the interview there. And at the very least, you should come and, kind of be one of our quote unquote special guests that show up at the Mimi and Greg show panel. You can just be there asking questions in the audience, but just playing. He would be thrilled, by the way, if you were there, because we want all our friends in the audience. So we're just end up with everybody in the audience on stage. Essentially, is what our plan is.
What are the dates on Rose City? I already hear
Rose
my wife
City
after
is the 22nd to the 24th. That's the Friday, the 22nd.
Okay,
I love it. I know you've been listening, and so you can clearly, but like literally, I don't know how or why, but I've just gotten everyone to go to Rose City Comic Con this year. They should be hiring me as their PR marketing person, because literally, like, people who said they weren't going are now going, and we got Nicola coming from Australia. So
I know, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
That's so amazing.
And then Phil was like triple booked, and he's like, no, we're doing the Historia thing, so we're going to do it. So I don't even know what's happening. I'm putting it all out there. Everybody needs to
can I just say, as a listener of yours, and I would say this even if we weren't friends, you are being modest, and I think you do know the reason why it did happen is because this podcast is so good, and you've built it so assiduously, and you've built it with such rigor and love. And I think that is reflected. And accordingly, it was very natural sounding to me when I heard about the Rose City pen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, then hopefully see you there. All right, everybody. Spencer Ackerman, go out, get Waller versus Wildstorm, send questions, make comments, let it be controversial in your mind, whatever the case may be, but, just read it. So thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Love to you and Oscar.
Likewise. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.